Maybe you're like me and you didn't grow up with old school style gaming, and to you, when you hear old school or OSR, the thing that pops in your head is lethality for the sake of lethality. I'd heard the term OSR for a long time before I ever decided to dip my toes into the water. I thought it was really just a lot of nostalgia baiting and people wishing things were the way they were back in the good old days of gaming. And while, yeah, there's some truth to some of that for many folks out there, I do think that there are a lot of merits of old school styles of play that get overlooked in the modern era. It's very easy to dismiss old school games and think, well, we've come so far. There have been so many good changes to the way we play games. And yes, while I do agree that's true, I think we've taken this approach in some circles of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There were a lot of great lessons from old school games, and I think books like these knock issues can really highlight what is great about old school play. So we're going to dive into Knock Issue 1 today. It's pretty thick. I'm not going to go over everything, but these books have really been inspiring me lately, and I just wanted to talk about them with you guys. So I've been really devouring these since I got back from Gen Con. They've been really inspiring to me, and I've been sort of lovingly referring to them in my own head as the OSR Bible. They're just chock full of the why of what makes OSR fun. Don't know how I missed out on them for so long, but I finally backed the Kickstarter and got my own set. And if my voice sounds a little weird throughout this video, I apologize. My kid's asleep, so I'm trying to do this as quiet as humanly possible. But I just wanted to get this out and talk a bit about the Knock magazines, so we'll start over here with issue 1. And first off, I really love the style of these magazines. It reminds me kind of the Morkborg, or maybe rather Morkborg reminds me of this. They're really quality products, and they come with all kinds of goodies like this little insert, and it could actually be used as a bookmark, which is what I typically do with it. And if you open up the slipcover, it's actually chock full of extras and goodies, tables to roll on, things like that. Even like you can see a reactions table here in the spine. And as you can see, there's absolutely no wasted space. It goes throughout the entirety of this cover. I mean, they even put a table of demon true names on the inside of the spine. Now, this is a product by the Merry Mushman, which means it's in France. So if you're in the US like me, you are going to get charged for overseas shipping, but I think it's well worth the price tag. Okay, and with that out of the way, let's dig into what makes issue 1 great and what I've been really loving about it. Start off with the D12 pamphlets found in dungeons, which is just a lot of fun, and I really cannot say enough about how inspiring these magazines have been to me. A little foreword about what this is by Eric Newden. I hope I'm saying that right. But yeah, if you're curious what's in this first issue, just go ahead and pause the video here, but I'm going to read off a few things that I have read that really inspired me. Okay, maybe you're not familiar with what an OSR game is, so I am going to read this blurb quickly by Brooks Daly. For me, the OSR has always had a very specific appeal. I don't need it to be my end-all, be-all general tool. I already have a dozen other options for character-focused, narrative-heavy drama. Instead, OSR games are at their best when treated as an intentionally focused experience. In a time when the current edition of D&D is a kitchen sink experience, the attraction to OSR is what makes these games different. Objective, challenge-based gaming. Most of the games I love actively embrace failure. Burning Wheel, Apocalypse World, even my own work in progress, Sword and Scoundrel, and similar games are all designed to fail forward. Failure is not only an expected part of play, it's relied upon to drive the narrative forward. You're not playing these games to accomplish things, you're playing them to see what happens. OSR design takes the opposite approach. Most games in this class base XP on 2 categories, defeating enemies and recovering treasure. These are both objective-based reward mechanics. If you want to advance, you have to succeed. You must actually accomplish something to move forward. Sometimes I'm in the mood for a tragic, twisting narrative. But sometimes I just want to be challenged. I want my players' incentives to be their smartest, most resourceful selves and be rewarded when they overcome the challenges set before them. I'm going to skip a bit, otherwise I could read this entire magazine cover to cover. But discussing encounter-based high adventure here, it says, it's a deeply rewarding experience, but it can also be emotionally exhausting. I'm not always up for it as a player or as a GM. Sometimes you want to be playing Game of Thrones, other times what you really want is Conan the Barbarian. OSR games are built to emulate the best kind of old-school pulps. Like any Weird Tales story, we aren't here to explore the internal conflicts of the protagonist. The lead character is here to give us a view into a world of exotic locales, thrilling heroics, and a whole lot of weird shit. This shift in focus brings an entirely different kind of creative outlet. Prepping for a character-focused game is all about finding ways to reincorporate aspects of those characters into the game and building events to force the PCs to make hard decisions. In an OSR game, the GM's creative efforts are the exact opposite. You are focusing entirely on the world itself, creating interesting scenarios, locations, creatures, items, set pieces, and other encounters. You are creating things purely because you think they are cool. You don't need to worry about how the PC's deep-seated philosophical issues will come into play. They'll come for the treasure anyway. Then there's a section about ocular dice and the impartial adjudicator, and player skill and fictional engagement. I do want to read this a little bit here. For many people, one of the major draws of the OSR is the way the games allow for direct engagement with the fiction. In many cases, you can bypass challenges through role-playing alone. This might take the form of negotiating your way through a social encounter, narrating your way through disarming a trap, or solving a puzzle with raw player intelligence alone. In a way, resorting to the dice can even be seen as a fail state. Once you have to fall back on mechanical abilities, you are leaving things up to chance and usually putting your character at risk. This approach works so well in OSR precisely because of the very gameable gaps these systems leave. There's a bit in here on adventure and expedition, and this first line reminds me of the Colville video, "What is the equipment list for?" In nearly any other game I play, equipment and supplies are generally handwave. Tracking time, speed and distance are just irrelevant trivialities that get in the way of the story being told. However, in OSR, they are a crucial part of the logistics of exploration. And I'm going to skip a bit here and read this part. In any other game, time, speed, and inventory are often unnecessary simulation and thus ignored. In OSR, they are an iron triangle of risk management and an important expression of player skill. Creating your own Lewis and Clark or Oregon Trail expedition is a fun experience that isn't really found in any other kind of game. And I totally agree with this. As I've been reading more OSR style games, or even Land of Eam, there's such a focus on the items that you bring with you, how much you need to take in order to bring stuff back, and just, things like discovering or creating items. And I've personally found it a lot of fun and a refreshing change from just kind of hand-waving any possible need for equipment. Alright, there's a really great section here comparing old and new D&D, but I will just read a snippet here. In discussing old school games, Gavin Norman writes, "The defining factors seem to be the terseness and sparsity of the older D&D rules, especially if you look at the original version of the game OD&D or the basic game, which was released during the late 1970s to early 1980s. They don't cover very much and rarely go into much depth. Later versions of the game progressively filled in these gaps, whether with the minutiae of AD&D or the systematic rationalization and core mechanics of D&D 3 or 4. However, the early games solved this issue of how to determine what happens in situation X in a very different way. Make something up on the spot. Need to know if characters can jump over a pit? There's no jumping skill. The DM has many options. Just say yes, just say no way, roll versus dex, give it a 2 in 6 chance, etc. Completely dependent on the situation at hand. There are many things about these systems, or lack of systems, that create a play experience which I personally enjoy very much. This is not a game of rules, it's a game of improvisation, growing characters versus character builds, less is more, and rules where necessary." Now I know this next bit will be obvious to a lot of people who haven't played rules-like games, but I do want to read it here. "The lack of specific rules and reliance on the DM to make improvised rulings rather than relying on predefined rules brings home an extremely important feature of old-school RPGs. The atmosphere of the game is far more immersive and mysterious if the players are thinking in terms of being their character rather than in terms of what they're allowed to do by the rules. That's why AD&D, for example, the player's handbook only has rules for creating characters. All the other rules of the game are in the Dungeon Master's Guide." Improvisation. One of the things I enjoy most about the role-playing hobby as a whole is the act of making stuff up on the spot with a group of people. It's much more fun than looking things up in books. Growing characters versus character builds. When the procedure for character creation is as simple as 1, roll ability scores in order, 2, choose a class, 3, buy equipment, there's no room for mechanical tweaking, which has come to be known in later editions as character builds, which is, I believe, something of a game in itself, which I definitely agree with. This further brings home the fact that this is a game not about rules and mechanics. Your character is differentiated from others by how you play them and what experiences you go through with the character in the game, not by what numbers you have written on your character sheet. In effect, you're growing or building your character as you play. I really like this bit here about the cocktail codex and taking monster design from classics. In this section, Chris McDowell, writer of Into the Odd and games like Mythic Bastionlands, talks about basically taking the Lich stat block and tweaking a thing here or there to make completely different and unique monsters. Here, he talks about experimenting with the core. He says, we can move the focus to psionics, we get the Mind Flayer. We can tighten down the magic powers to single extraordinary abilities to give us the Medusa, Doppelganger, Dryad, or even the Rust monster. We can keep things closer to the arcane magic and focus on a particular school to get classics like the Evil Necromancer, and so on. And I love this section, so I'll just highlight it here. The Lich's power is balanced by its weak physical form, classically a skeleton, but sometimes taken to the demi-Lich extreme of just a skull. Another extreme take is going for the brain in a jar. Giving the Lich a ghost form keeps them unable to have much physical impact, but gives them the added power of being immaterial. So you should pull back on their magical powers if you go in this direction. This balance doesn't have to be physical weakness, but could be another form of physical restriction. An aboleth is physically large, but bound to water, and limited on where it can move. Vampires have a similar combination of physical power with serious weakness to balance their magical abilities. So, let's make a new creation where the physical weakness is replaced with stupidity and a vulnerability, and that's how you get the Tome Golem. Tower wizards, necro wizards, lonely wizards have the time to commit to exceeding the typical human limitations of knowing the unknowable. As you approach the Planck scale of magical minutiae, it passes beyond mere education and study. At this level, you must cheat. These cheaty boss wizards should be freely given outrageous skills and stamina ratings, huge, gigantic, suicidally dangerous sorceress chops. The players can go ahead and literally brute force the issue of killing them, or they can be smart and figure out exactly how this bastard is cheating and catch them out. Then we get a D66 table on what those weaknesses for these wizards might be. I just thought this was a really fun idea. The wizard is just so powerful at this point for living so long and studying so deep that they're almost impossible to kill straight up. Like Daniel Sell suggests here, you can just brute force the fight. And I like this because in this OSR style, it really challenges the player's mind and not just something written on the sheet. We get a D66 table of starting gear and just a ton of really fun tables in general to spice up your games. Alright, this is the section I wanted to focus on most in this video because this is just a near must-read for OSR adventure writing, especially dungeon crawls. This is the Dungeon Checklist by Arnold K. Sometimes I write dungeons. Today I wrote a checklist of things to put in the dungeon. The first couple of items are pretty obvious, but it's still good to enumerate their usage. Alright, number 1, something to steal. Treasure gives players a reason to go into the dungeon in the first place. On a metagame level, treasure is money, money is XP, and XP is tied to the idea of character advancement. It's the prime mover for the system. 2 points. First, remember that treasure doesn't need to be treasure. It can be shiny shit, such as boring old coins or the jeweled brassiere of a zombie queen. Knowledge, such as where to find more treasure, or information you can use to blackmail the king. Or even a sage who can answer a single question honestly. Friendships, such as an amorous purple worm that follows you around and protects you when it's hungry and a little bored. Occasionally it leaves egg sacs laying around for you to fertilize, and it will get angry if you don't sit on them for at least an hour. Trade goods, like a wagon full of tea worth 10,000 GP. When I give out large parcels of trade goods as treasure, I give half the XP now and the other half of XP when it's sold. I just really like the idea of a mercantile campaign. Territorial, like a tower the players can claim as their own or an apartment in the nice part of the city, and the chances of being stabbed in your sleep are dramatically reduced. Useful adventuring shit, like a magic sword, scroll to blot out the sun, or a parachute. Second, treasure tells a story too. Cover your treasure in religious symbols, anointed in troll blood. Don't let your coins be coins. The second thing every dungeon needs is something to be killed. This is pretty obvious. Of course there are threatening things in the dungeon. There has to be some challenge, otherwise it isn't a dungeon. The simplest way to do that is with things that are trying to kill you. Yes, you can have monstrous dungeons based on traps. Those are cool, but that's why this checklist is written in pencil, not in stone. There are many ways to make combat with even basic monsters more interesting. Also, remember that dungeons tell their story through nouns. The history of a dungeon is usually relayed through monster choices. Why use orcs when you can use degenerate cannibal versions of the original dwarven inhabitants? And descriptions of those creatures. A barnacle-covered zombie, an iron golem charred by dragonfire. the elven armor scraps that the goblins are wearing, the elven wand rifle that one of the goblins has for some reason. Unfortunately, these pages are quite glossy. I tried to close the window, but it didn't help much. Sorry about that. Something to kill you. Dungeons are designed to be beaten. That's why we don't fill them with inescapable obstacles. Rocks fall, everyone dies. Or impenetrable barriers. Sorry, the whole dungeon is wrapped in an adamantine dome. You can't get in. But dungeons need to feel like they were designed to be unbeatable. It's important to feel like this isn't just a bowling alley where the DM sets up pins for the players to knock down. You need to have deadly elements in your deadly dungeon for it to feel deadly. But just follow these 2 important rules. Try to follow at least one. Label your deadly shit as such. A sleeping dragon. A door barricaded from the player's side with a sign warning of deadly spiders. These things look deadly from a distance. A chance to escape. Maybe the dragon can't fit into the smaller tunnels around his lair. Maybe the manticore is chained to a rock. Both of these serve the same function. They allow the players to pick their own battles, something you can't do on a linear railroad game. I think that's why a lot of OSR folks hate the idea of boss battles, because they're the one battle in the dungeon that is required. Horrible monsters that are avoidable give the players agency and allows them to be architects of their own demise. Side note, I think that nearly all combats should be escapable, sometimes with a cost, dropped food, gold, maybe a dead PC or hireling. In my experience, PCs will get themselves killed often enough even if the enemies never left the rooms they were in. Also, putting unbeatable monsters in your dungeon also allows the dungeon to be self-scaling. The level 1 party will just tiptoe past the dragon, while the level 6 party might consider fighting it so they can steal the treasure it is sleeping on top of. And just like that, a dungeon becomes appropriate for both level 1 parties and level 6 parties. And this is another reason why I think OSR games have such a wide range of level appropriateness. It's both easy and expected that players will flee from fights that they can't win. Number 4, different paths. Different paths allow different parties to experience the dungeon in different ways. It's a randomizer, similar to what you'd get if you ordered the dungeon rooms according to a random number generator. And it keeps you, the DM, from getting bored. Player agency. Players can choose the path they're better suited for. The party with 2 clerics can take the zombie-infested tunnel, and the party with air support can get themselves dropped into the courtyard. It also allows dungeons to be a little bit self-adjusting too. Players who are more confident can challenge the front door, while lower-level parties will creep around the outside. Like, just reading this is reminding me of playing like Dark Souls or Elden Ring. It allows parties to walk away from rooms they don't like. Part of the OSR philosophy, as I see it, is the ability to walk away from fights. If a party doesn't want to fight a room with archer skeletons entombed in the walls, especially after 2 of them were blinded in the last room, they can retreat and find another way in. It's an option they have. The last reason to have multiple paths is to allow for dungeon mastery, and no, I don't mean DMing. I mean that as the players learn more about the dungeon, they become better at exploring its geography. They can lure the carrion crawler over the pit trap that they know is there. They can retreat into a looped path instead of retreating into unexplored rooms. Always a dangerous tactic. At the same time, don't throw in random paths just for the hell of it. The more paths you put in, the less linearity there is to your dungeon. And sometimes you want linearity, especially if it comes to teaching your players things or giving clues. Sometimes you want to show the players the eerily clean hallway before they bump into the gelatinous cube. Maybe you want them to meet the zombies with hook hands before they meet the room with the crawling animated hands. There's nothing wrong with a little linearity if you're putting it in there for a reason. Number 5, someone to talk to. Every dungeon needs someone to talk to. It's a role-playing game. NPCs are the cheapest and easiest way to add depth to your dungeon. It's easy because everyone knows how to roleplay a generic goblin prisoner and has a pretty good idea of what information or services that goblin prisoner can provide. And it's got depth because there are so many ways that a party can use a goblin prisoner. There's almost no bloat. You don't need to invent new mechanics, and it takes almost no space to write. There's a goblin in a cage. His name is Zeglum, and he has been imprisoned by his fellows for setting rats free. The problem is that a lot of dungeons are treasure vaults, tombs, and abandoned mines. The only creatures you usually encounter in those places are undead, golems, zombies, and vermin with ambiguous food chains. None of those are really known for being chatty, so here's a few options. Rival Dungeoneering Party. Goblins never need explanation. I agree. Spell effects like a chatty magic mouth spell or something. Graveyard Nymph. Ghosts. Make a sympathetic one. Everyone expects them to be jerks. Ghoul's head, sitting on a shelf. It can talk if you blow through the neck hole. An old man trapped in a painting who communicates by painting. Consider giving your players speak with stones or speak with lock spells. Dungeons usually have those.
And breakfast cereals, and fruit bats, and large...
Skip a bit, brother.
These are all great examples, but I'm going to skip ahead to number 6, something to experiment with. Now this is my favorite section, and you'll probably see why. Aside from something that will probably kick the party's ass, I think it might be the most OSR-ish. These are the unexplainable, the weird, and the unknown. And I don't mean unknown like an unidentified potion is unknown. I mean something that introduces a new wrinkle into the game. A room with 2 doors of different sizes. Anything that is put into the small door emerges from the large door at twice the size, and vice versa. Anything that goes through the doors twice in the same direction, double enlarged or double shrunk, has terrible consequences. A pedestal, if anything is placed on top of it, it turns into its opposite. Okay, the opposite of sword is an axe, but what is the opposite of a banana? A metal skeleton. If a skull is placed atop it, a speak with dead spell is cast on it. Wishing wells that are portals to other small ponds in the dungeon. Where the portal goes is determined by what item you throw in the well before you jump in. Alright, I'm going to skip a bit again, but it says here, weird shit is important because they give players an unsolvable problem. Players know how to best leverage their attacks and abilities. Sure, you can mix it up a bit and force them to think and use different tactics. But by and large, they already know how to use their characters to their best effect. They've been practicing it for levels and levels after all. It's important to let players practice the stuff they're good at, i.e. combat with their character, but it's also important to throw some wrenches in there too. Weird shit follows its own rules. Suddenly players don't know anything about how to solve this problem, and they have to figure it out anew. Bonus points if it's something that could potentially unbalance your game. Nothing gives players more agency than the ability to completely derail your setting. Not that you need to go that far. More bonus points if it's something that will probably hurt the player at first, but can be used to their advantage once they've figured out how it works. One last perk. It gives level 1 characters a chance to be useful as level 10 characters. Anyone can stick an arm into a hole in the wall, and anyone can figure out what it does. Weird shit often poses threats and rewards that are level agnostic. Okay, I'm not going to read everything word for word because I want you to go out and read the book for yourself, but just assume that every one of these headers answers the why of this thing and talks about some of the old school philosophies behind it. Like lastly, something the players probably won't find. There's a great section here on what's missing from kids' RPGs. I love this bit on wandering monsters and having a purpose. And I'm going to read one of these highlighted sections. Everything in the adventure needs to inspire or get cut. And that wandering monster table doesn't inspire shit. The designer must inspire the DM. That's the purpose for the adventure. If it doesn't inspire, then it needs improvement. Here, Bryce Lynch talks about get your creatures doing something. I think the principle is so important that I have one entire page of my DM screen devoted to it. This whole section talks about have your monsters doing something and not just waiting around in rooms to attack adventurers when they show up. Things like looking for a straggler to pick off, or something such gives the DM something to riff off of. Sometimes you have to narrow things down in order to get the old brain juices going. Give your creatures a reason to wonder about or have them engaged in something. Then we have a really fun, ridiculous table about different wandering monsters and what you find them doing, like centipedes tracing letters in the dust, or laying eggs in a dead body, or wrapped around a meditating monk. I promise to you folks, every table in this book is just chock full of inspiration, and you could write entire adventures off of it. In fact, I have. And this is maybe one of the best sections in the entire book, Expose Your Prep. You've probably heard the phrase attack every part of the character sheet from Arnold K. Let's flip that and see how the players can capitalize on every bit of your prep. I find that the crime of giving too much information is minor in comparison to the heinous crime of giving too little information. Give good answers to good questions, and I want to give even more if the players are crafty. Expose the map, expose the NPCs, expose the future, expose the tables, and expose the mechanics. Why setting high stakes matters. This is a great read. I'm not going to go over it all now. These books are just full of so many ideas, so much information, dungeons, all kinds of tables to roll on and inspire your games. It just goes on for days. Then to top it all off, we've got some great maps in the back and ideas for running your own dungeon crawls. Okay, that's just the first issue, but I have 5 of these, and I just really wanted to share it in a bit of like what's been inspiring me lately. I think this is a really great vignette into the OSR. Like I said, jokingly calling it my OSR Bible. There's just so much cool stuff in here, and a lot of the why and the philosophies behind why you would do things a certain way in old school style games. I just think if you're not familiar with an old school game, or you're wanting to run something like Into the Odd, Shadow Dark, Mythic Bastionlands, even Land of Eam, it's a good idea to take a look at a book like this, or maybe the Principia Apocrypha. I haven't actually read that one myself, but that's next on the list. Anyways, just wanted to share this with you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Okay, cool. Well, that's it for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you found something that's useful at your tables. I've just really been enjoying these knock issues. I've just been really enjoying these knock issues. They've been very inspiring to me. In fact, I started to immediately write my own old school game and adventure after reading them. I'm actually kind of writing 2 totally different style TTRPGs at the moment. If you want to check out what we've got going on, come over to the Discord. I'll leave a link up on the screen. If you want to play test games, just try out more games to play. I've really been trying to push this initiative on the server to play more games more often. If that sounds like something you're interested in, welcome to the Elder Goblin Academy. Oh, and while I'm here, if you're in my local neighborhood or near the Charlotte area, Lon from the Discord did mention that there is a RPG mashup happening on the August 23rd. So check it out. Here's a flyer. It's for a good cause. It's playing games for fun, but the money all goes towards the Autism Society. Make sure to check it out if you're in that area. All right, folks, it's very hot out here and I can't see anything. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope you found something inspiring. Do all the YouTube things. Check out the Quantum Ogre cast. And as always, learn, adapt, and grow. Peace. Tales from Elsewhere Clockwork is a post-apocalyptic, Weird West action horror role-playing game. A game where you play as hardy survivors, everyday folk like me, attempting to survive the horrors of Elsewhere after the calamity tore apart the barrier between realities. This game uses a visceral injury system combined with cold shots while keeping the math light and the violence high. Character creation is open-ended, where the players pick from over 50 backstory elements that they mix and match to create their unique survivor. You could be a preacher who was raised among the Church of Ashes, who's on the hunt for men that left him for dead. Or maybe you're a prospector from a small business, a once city slicker that got chased out of town. The combinations are endless. The game features narrative-heavy threats and monsters, with rich folklore and mysterious origins inspired by real fears and anxieties of 19th century peoples. For instance, the Kentucky Sawbones is a manifestation of my fear of amputation, while the Blood Oiler evoke the dehumanization and unstoppable nature of the Industrial Revolution. The game is the brainchild of a personal friend of mine and fellow dungeon tuber, Peter, of Tales from Elsewhere, a channel where you can find insightful evidence into the philosophies behind game design, such as the one that probably went into this game right here. The Kickstarter goes live September 2nd, and buddy, that is a train you don't want to miss. But the pre-launch is happening right now. So go over there right now, click to stay informed, sign up now, pages are live, now back to your regularly scheduled programming.